Hello everyone and welcome to the Topical Hour. Stranger Things Season 4 is the worst season yet. No, that title is not deceptive and I'm gonna spend this video trying to prove it to you. Now before we start, I'll acknowledge that I was originally one of the people who said Stranger Things was bad just because everyone else liked it. A lot of time has gone by, and I know now that the first few seasons of the show were actually quite good. But now we're really starting to hit a quality barrier. This show is unique because we've just been following the same crew through new adventures for about 7 years. Except I think people like to forget that this show was meant to end after season 1, or at least the story was. And so when you put into perspective that none of this was supposed to happen, you start to see the cracks. But I don't want to talk too much about the other seasons, so let's focus on this one. First off, when you analyze what any single character does, it's surprisingly little. Like, what does Mike do throughout the entire season other than just fumble 11? What does Dustin do other than hang out with Eddie? And I'll get into my problems with Eddie later. It's widely agreed that this show simply has too many characters, and the only reason it partially gets away with it is because they know we love these characters. I mean, we're talking about every episode being over an hour long, and I'm having trouble naming what characters do outside the finale. And this is easily the biggest issue of the entire season, but Stranger Things is not strange anymore. I know it's a weird thing to say, what can you call objectively strange, right? Well, what I mean to say is that we spent the last 3 seasons knowing exactly what's going on at all times and usually waiting for the characters to catch up. It's difficult to articulate, but it's true. The Upside Down, as it's called in the show, is another dimension, and the characters know everything there is to know about it. There were times in previous seasons where something would sound kind of like a D&D thing, and then they just base all their plans off that and it would actually work. It's basically the Backrooms conundrum of once you explain everything, there's nothing interesting left to think about. At the end of this new season, we find out that Vecna, or Number 1, basically created and influenced a lot of what we know about the Upside Down. Now I know a lot of people like the twist of Vecna in Number 1, and it's cool, until the moment he enters the Upside Down. At that point, it ruins everything we've been told in previous seasons. Now Demogorgons are just animals from another dimension, and the Mind Flayer, a sinister creature of smoke that we barely can comprehend, is basically just another form of Vecna. It takes all of the punch away from what we've seen, and it takes the potential away from what the Mind Flayer could be. How cool would it be if the Mind Flayer was something Vecna was scared of, and it beefed up the Mind Flayer as the ultimate near-Lovecraftian threat to our characters? Instead, we have some guy who the writers quite clearly never planned to be the big bad, who's not doing a bad job, but he's undermining everything we've already established. I know that was a lot, but don't worry, that was the first half of what's wrong with this season. The second half, which is the part that bugs me the most when I think about it, the entirety of this season is spent going back to how it was at the beginning of the last season. Now, I know you might be trying to think about what I mean, and you might think of an example or two, but no, for real. Almost everything in this season is going back to last season. So we'll start with the most obvious example, Chief Jim Hopper. He definitely should have died, and yeah, it would have been tragic, but sometimes characters die. And I don't see what would have been so bad about just showing us he survived during the original scene if you were planning to do it all along anyway, rather than just teasing it cryptically. But whatever, I can live with it, it's a big story thread, so it's hard to erase anyway. And then there's 11, who spends almost the entire season just trying to get her powers back. It's another thing I can't criticize too much, but again, why didn't we set this up last season if we knew it would be such a big threat? Why didn't the show show us that Brenner was alive besides through dialogue? And this is a tangent, but why is it so easy for our heroes to sidestep the government in this show? From sneaking into the Russian base in Hawkins' lab in the previous seasons, it's way too often for it not to be an issue. Especially when 11, the only one with genuine powers, is the only one who's never with the group when a form of military is involved. It's not like we were cavemen in the 80s, and a big element of seasons 1 and 2 was the constant fear that people were listening and we wouldn't be able to do anything to stop them if they tried anything. But back to things being reversed this season, I like Steve Harrington as much as the next guy. Really. But one of the best parts of his character is the fact that he lost Nancy and let it go. And even when she apologized about some of the other stuff, he still understood. And now we're actively undoing that, along with Nancy being inconsistent about her feelings, and the show is forcing those two back together for fan service. I would understand if Nancy and Jonathan split, that's fine. But from Jonathan right to Steve, seriously? Along with the show flat out backtracking throughout the entire season, we just have inconsistent characters. One of the coolest parts about being introduced to Robin last season was she knew a bunch of languages and was confident in just about everything she did. But now that she's been revealed to be gay, she's a bumbling mess and a nervous wreck who barely has any people skills. I don't know why, but it just makes her seem super weak for no reason. And then there's Max, probably the character I had the most trouble relating to throughout the season. I'm not gonna sit here and pretend that a lot of the stuff she did this season wasn't cool. I kinda wish they would stop hyping up Billy as some kind of hero, even though he was abusive and almost openly racist. So much so that no one even noticed when he was possessed by a smoke demon. I know that was her brother, but come on. And also, and this might just be me, but Max should have died at the season finale. It's not like I want Max to die or anything, but I really think it would have added the proper stakes and given real consequences for what's going on, at least for the characters. And it feels really cheap to say that Vecna's plan worked and Max also survived. This show really can't seem to stand ending characters that have been around for more than one season, aside from the Doctor, of course. This is the part of the video where I talk about Lucas. I actually liked every single thing Lucas had to do in the season and wouldn't change any of it. It was all good. Moving on. I've already talked about Vecna, the season villain, and aside from him ruining a ton of aspects of the show, the character itself is alright. Whoever decided to use the Dr. Manhattan theme knew what they were doing, and it really slaps when it comes around for the big reveal. But back to the issues, the acting is probably one of them. I know this one's gonna sound pretentious because I'm not an actor, and I know people were basically demanding that the Emmys acknowledge some of the actors, but, and I'll say this once, every single actor this season was either fine or bad except the guy who plays Lucas. Hopper and Joyce were fine, the girl who plays Robin had terrible lines, and the way she acted them didn't help. I don't know why they decided Dustin would be a smart man-child this season, but sure. Mike's acted decently, but everything he's written to do sucks. I'm not going to go through every character, but you get what I mean. Even these actors, who I've seen acted well before, just don't know what to do with these characters anymore. It's difficult to explain this well with so many characters. But to sum up, Stranger Things Season 4 is probably the worst season yet. The actors meant to play high schoolers are in their 20s and show it. They can't act with the terrible writing they're being given, and they spend the entire season trying to revert what we established last season. And to top it all off, probably my least favorite part is that it takes what made Stranger Things cool and the mystery element of the upside down, what really lurks there, how did it get there, and just does away with all that. This season spends so much time answering questions that we don't need answered that it takes away from its characters. And like I said, there's too many characters for that to be acceptable anymore. I mean, the most that Mike's crew even does is drive a pizza van to pick up Eleven, who would have been fine on her own. Also, if you want Will Byers to be gay, then make him gay. Don't beat around the bush with it, it's not really like it even matters that much. But the show is being so heavy-handed about the situation that it's starting to get annoying. I can barely even remember a time where Will was the focus of the story, and now the amount of characters in the show is so high that we don't even have time for him. As for how I'd fix the show from this forward, it's difficult to say, because next season is seemingly the last one. I think I'd just axe all the adults and let them have their happy endings so we can focus on the younger characters. They're all in their 20s anyway. I think it would make narrative sense for them to do things on their own, since that's not only how it started, but something that's been built towards for a while, at least in my eyes. Also, I said I'd discuss my problems with Eddie. He is one of those characters that is so likable that the show is clearly building him up to die. And it's really stupid because not only did he die for practically no reason other than because he was written to, but it also just feels really cheap. It feels like an unnatural branch of the story just so the writers could make you feel some kind of emotion really easily. And it subsequently made me have almost no reaction. Also, I thought he was kinda cringe. Like, when he hops on the table in the first scene, I literally cannot watch. And last thing, but the side villain whose name I've already forgotten was undeniably also really stupid. The frickin' school bully basketball player who makes so many leaps in logic to blame Lucas for things. I will say, though, that he got one of the most brutal TV deaths I've seen in my entire life. Like, wow. As for the number score for the season, it gets a 4 out of 10. It's just really disappointing to see that the characters feel crowded and we're constantly backtracking, and now the entire show almost feels like a parody of itself. And more on the acting I didn't like. This might be a controversial one, but I did not like Millie Bobby Brown's acting at all this or last season. Well, anyway, everyone, thank you for making it to the end of the video. I'd implore you to like the video and subscribe to the channel before the Stranger Things fans find me. Or not, that's fine. Play nice, people.